Most important piece of legislation since the decriminalization of 377. So in that backdrop, we have to understand how the rights of LGBTQ have developed in India, and in that sense, we go on to, if we are giving them the rights, what are the second and the third order effects that will arise from this right. So I believe that we must first discuss upon a bit of history, a bit of the stance of the petitioners, what disadvantages they face in the society by not having this right to marry the person that they love. Like, this is, I would call it a human right. I am not sure about the legal implications of it, but I sincerely believe that since something as sacred to a person's existence, and something as sacred to a person's existence, such as love, should not be hampered by society and legal hindrances. So the first thing will be that, as to what disadvantages they face by not having this right of marriage. uh, Coming on to the second point, it should be the stance of the government. So I sincerely believe that the government is not, if I don't know how to put it, but the government is not 100% against giving this right of same-sex marriage to the people of India. I believe that there are some nuances attached to it. So we must discuss that, and finally we'll see where the discussion takes us.
Here,
Yes. So I completely agree with Shashwat, and I'll not repeat it, but I'll just take the cue from what he said, and I'll continue in terms that it is very true that it's a very sacred thing, and we must really take it as a human right. Again, speaking besides the legal implications that can follow, but it is also very important for us to understand this. If we must, like, if we are going into the nuances of same sex marriage, we must not limit our discussions to India. We must see comparatively a little bit as to what has been done in other countries, other jurisdictions, because same sex marriage, it's not a culture, it's not a trend that only emanated in India. It's not limited to India. It started in other countries as well, and many countries including USA has also recognized same sex marriage in 2015 back then. So we must understand on what constitutional premise they offered this right to all the LGBTQA community of same sex marriage. What was the constitutional basis? What was the constitutional premise? And how can we bring that to India? And can we bring that to India? That must be the question. And how it is different from other jurisdictions, and what constitutional principles are we missing or should we adopt?
right, right. So, just to set the tempo of this discussion, I would like to ask, uh, would you like to enlighten about the adoption laws that are in India? Do you know anything about the
Uh,
adoption laws?
yes, not really precisely, but I have a very vague idea about it. Adoption is allowed even to those who are living, even to those who are in a homosexual relationship, but only it is only limited to women, and it is not guaranteed or it is not offered to any men who are in a homosexual relationship. And adoption, as sir very rightly pointed it out, adoption will play a very major and very paramount role, as we can also see the very argument that state offered to the court in this very petition that is going on in Supreme Court was precisely the adoption laws, like what bad effects it can bring to the offsprings, to the children, because we have never seen any such. It basically is a sociological, so this is not very legal debate, it's a sociological as well.
No,
So we have never
there is a legal angle attached to it because I am not aware of it. maybe you must be knowing. Do we have any medical test to ascertain whether a person is a homosexual or a gay or bisexual? Do we have any medical test?
So I
If
will.
I may,
Okay, yeah,
uh,
Mihir, you can continue. I'll give you a very short answer. Then Mihir, you can elaborate much upon. So fundamentally, I don't think that there is any medical test that conclusively would say whether a person is a homosexual or gender dysmorphic
Bisexual,
or anything of that sort. But we have to understand that there are certain scientific researchers out there, that there are certain personality traits that would personality as well as your social environment that would render a person to become a homosexual or genderqueer. So in that aspect, we have to understand that just by giving a medical definition would not really go a long way to solve the debate. Right or wrong, the Chief Justice of India did actually say that there is no such thing as a biological man or a biological woman.
right?
What are we to make of that? You know.
So let us take a hypothetical case. A man marries a man. So in this type of marriage, one partner calls itself a husband, another partner calls itself a wife. And since they have married, they have inherited all the laws of the land. Now, since they cannot reproduce and they want to be complete couple, they would like to adopt. And they go to an orphanage and they adopt a girl child. Is there a guarantee to the safety of that girl child? Because since we don't have a biological test to ascertain whether the person is bisexual or not, maybe if that girl is in her puberty and after that, maybe some mishap might occur with her. And it can occur with a straight couple also, but the chances, it increases. And will the society accept this? Two men, because in the eyes of the society, they are two men. You can't change the whole society. So two men raising a girl child.
yes, this exactly brings to my point. So, what Chief Justice CJI Chandrachud said in the very last hearing, Supreme Court, he told that there exists no concept of a biological man or a biological woman. It's all about the notions. If you have a notion of a biological woman, it does not depend on your genitals precisely. It is a notion that you tender to the society. It is a notion that you have from your innately. So this brings a very complex situation. As you also, sir, rightly pointed it out, that what happens, and in order to just make that very hypothetical situation a little more complex, what if someday the biological woman that was in the relationship between two men, the one was wife, let us say that after 5 years, that very man changes his notion to a man again. In that situation, there is no place for that very girl to go. Where should she go? So it raises very pertinent questions in this regard. Our statutes are gender based, our statutes are sex based and not gender based. So that brings all the issues to the point, because we have divided all the statutes in terms of a biological man and biological woman. Now, if we allow any individual to oscillate between the two notions, we cannot really harmonize all the statutes and this very idea of same sex marriage.
Right.
This can be one big problem.
Now, the paradigms on which the society is structured, okay, uh, we already have too many complications in the society. Like, for example, caste system is not a small thing. It's a very big factor, big player. And this, and the most important thing is that this uh, homosexuality is not limited to humans only. It's not a human adventure or a human misadventure. If you look at the primates, even the monkeys have homosexuality. That is true. But when we are structuring a society, we have to create some boundaries. And If you look at West, countries like Sweden, they are leaving God altogether, let alone so many norms. They are leaving God altogether. And when you are leaving God, the sanctity of marriage itself is gone with the winds, right? So, decriminalizing homosexuality, is it not enough that they want sanctity in the form of marriage? Because marriage, if you go by the dictionary, it is having a husband, right? So, live-in relationship
Sir,
is
on
having a, yes, yes, please.
on,
Yes,
on
Ashwin.
that point, sir, like since you are a practicing advocate, I'd like to go on to a bit because this is generally when I was researching on this, uh, it was weird for me to find out, but I believe that I do not have the whole information. Let's, for some time discuss upon the Hindu Marriage Act.
Okay.
Now, I shall present my screen and I shall show you the Hindu Marriage Act if it is all right by our moderator. Mr. Gaurav,
Yeah,
is
it's
that okay?
okay. Yeah, it's okay. Okay.
Okay,
I think
so
you have the access. I don't know. You have the access or not.
yeah, I can present my screen. That's not a problem. I have the access.
Yeah, now you
Uh,
can present your screen.
yeah,
Yeah.
can you see my screen?
Wait a minute. No. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Your
can
screen
see my
shared. Yeah.
screen. So
Yeah. Yes.
here you would notice that I have opened section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act that says conditions for a Hindu marriage. Now it says that a marriage may be solemnized between any two Hindus, if the following conditions are fulfilled, namely, neither a party has a spouse living at the time of marriage. Second, at the time of marriage, neither party is A, incapable of giving valid consent to it in consequence of unsoundness of mind. B, though capable of giving valid consent, has been suffering from mental disorder. It goes on to list out a few more conditions such as the sub in the relationship or degrees of prohibited relationship. I want to understand that where in this act uh, can two like where are same-sex couples not allowed to marry in this particular act? Because as far as I see it, it does not uh, give any notion of whether or not uh, this act is gender specific to the idea of marriage. Sir, if you might just
Mm,
answer that.
okay, okay. Well, if you read the Hindu Marriage Act properly, you will find that a Hindu marriage is solemnized only when certain rituals are followed.
Right.
So, in that ritual, there is no scope for the marriage of a man with a man.
There is not. I to that much I will agree with you, sir. But
So,
the thing
if
is
if
that
if if the rituals are not followed properly,
right,
a Hindu marriage doesn't take place. You
true.
you you analyze all the different variations of Hindu marriages throughout India, whether you go to Maharashtra, you go to Bengal or Odisha, Bihar, you will not find a single mantra where the two couples who have consummated in the relationship, they are either women or they are men. So any marriage of same sex will have to follow the path of court marriage. Then it doesn't become a Hindu marriage.
It is true to the point where, as far as the general practice of this country is concerned. But my concern is that when we talk about the Hindu Marriage Act specifically, it is not something that has been, codified, taking into account all kinds of Hindu practices. So, like if we go to South India, uh, before not before 1950s, I believe there was a prevalent practice of a woman having more than one husband. Or if we go to Northeast, there was a Hindu practice of a woman
It
having
is
more than
still
one
there.
husband.
It is
It
still
is
there.
still there,
If you go to Kumau, polyandry is there.
right? So this act does not take into like if it is the Hindu Marriage Act, and if its idea is to homogenize the practices of all these
Well.
different cultures, It was
See,
not an act which had.
I
Yes,
totally agree with you. But what you are saying is some very special practices, and like for example, the Kodegus,
right,
right, or the Jharkhandis, they have the Adivasis have a very unique kind of marriage. Or if you go to the Uttarakhand region, so these are special practices and they are taken note of. Because India is such a diverse country, no law which is made, it is perfect, it is fine tuned. So these may be the lacunae which are there in the Hindu Marriage Act. They can be fine tuned. They can be fine tuned to the extent that they would not allow same sex marriage, or they could be fine tuned to the extent that they could allow same sex marriage. That is not a big issue. The question is that same sex and marriage, are they not oxymorons?
so I will give you both the answers, because
Uh,
I
okay,
believe
Shashwat,
that
if I may interrupt, I'll just add one more question.
most
I'll just
definitely.
add one more question.
Yeah,
If you see Hindu Marriage Act, there is specific terminology that has been used throughout the act, which is husband and wife.
right.
Right?
And my very point is that if there are two individuals who both identify as men, they are allowed to engage in any sexual intercourse after an abdication, they both identify as men.
Why will the society take the assumption of those couples that he is the husband and she is the wife? Why will that? Why
Why
would the
should yes?
society take that assumption?
And let us say that both of the individuals are very much willing to take their notion as a men. That brings us to the very same sex marriage, that we both are men, but we still have love for each other and we want to marry. Now, how will you decide who is man and who is husband and who is wife?
Then why should they get married? They can live together happily ever after.
So I think that brings us to our, next, since we have discussed the pros and cons and a bit of history of this same-sex marriage. That brings us to the next question as to what rights they are, the people who are looking for same-sex marriage, what rights are they losing out on account of the absence of same-sex marriage? So I'll give you a general, very unspecified aspect of rights, which would relate to the benefits of marriage. So there is the primary benefit of marriage, that is companionship. I will concede here that even without marriage, a couple can have companionship up until the 377 was decriminalized. Now we are
Right.
at a point where we have to see whether all the other rights of marriage, such as when, for example, in many services, uh, a couple, that is the husband and a wife, can apply for a joint bank account or can apply for an insurance in which your spouse is already added into it. Now these are benefits that the same-sex couples, and I believe wrongly so, are losing out just on account of the fact that they are not of the same sex.
Okay. That is true. That
So
is true.
yeah,
And I recognize their rights. But these provisions can be made without changing or without specific enactment of laws. Even a government fiat can change the status that the banks will allow partners to have bank accounts. Other than that,
You're not
Am I
audible.
audible?
you're not
Am I
audible.
Shashwat,
audible?
you're not audible. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, you're audible.
You were
Shashwat.
saying
Yeah.
something?
Yeah. So besides what Shashwat mentioned, like there are obviously a lot of social factors associated with it, from ranging from insurance to inheritance. You can find a lot of social factors which are associated with the companionship. But again,
Exactly.
if you talk besides that, It's not just companionship. What we are doing basically, we are not just legitimizing one same-sex companionship. We are ultimately, resultantly, we are doing something which is in the terms of we are recognizing that a notion can decide the nature of status of sex of any individual. At the end of the day, we are doing this. If my notion is of a man or if my notion is of a woman, then it must be adhered to. We are not just in per se, we are not in exclusion of every other law. We are not just recognizing same sex. If we recognize same sex marriage, we are recognizing, we are accepting this fact that your notion enables you to decide what sex you inherit. Now that creates situation like that. This makes the situation more complex. It's not just about the companionship. If we talk about lot many laws are there in IPC, from ranging from again dowry to rape, all the laws are made on the very basis of sexual orientation and not the gender. And now if I recognize myself as a woman, being a man, genetically man, if I recognize myself as a woman after 6 p.m., the procedural laws will change for me. And if we recognize same sex marriage, we are enabling this thing. You can decide your sex on the basis of your notion. This hour you're a man, and the very next hour you're a woman. It is my notion. It is not my genitals, as CGI said. So this creates a problem. It's not just limited to the rights that are associated with companionship. Very basic rights, insurance, other benefits, statutory benefits of wife and husband, inheritance, but rights which are associated with individuals as well. Rights which are only given, which are only provided to women. Now that also will create a situation. That will make it way more complex than what we can fathom. What do you think, sir? Like, I would really love to hear you because that, like the argument that I heard of CJI, it created a very complex situation in my mind.
See, Meher, these are some things which are way into the future. Today we enact a law. What shape it's going to take, we really do not know. We can only presume, just a presumption. India, the notion of freedom and notion of human rights in India and the notion of society in India is not the same as that in the West. So if we bring the West's notion of freedom, it may not work. You rightly said about inheritance, and inheritance of land is one such thing. Do you think that India is still an agrarian society, right? And the soul of India still lives in the village, and the village is still it's still very conservative. Will they accept this?
I think on that very premise, the codification of personal laws were based. I think if you read, many commentators, they are in the opinion that when these personal laws, such as the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act, were enacted, it was not the majority opinion of the people of India at the time. It was basically, if I might put it this way, shoved down the throats of the people of India so that a change in the society can be made. Now, in that aspect, we have to, ask the question whether the Indian society needs that shove. So you mentioned about Western ideas and why this particular, you know, discourse would be a part, would ideally be a part of the Western, you know, debate. I fundamentally believe that we as Indians are much ahead of our Western counterparts when, as long as we are talking about uh, issues regarding the LGBTQ. I shall give you an example. So, Gaurav, I will present my screen again. So,
It's okay.
there was a problem which Mihir posed, where one may identify themselves as a women right after 6 p.m. so that It's only the lady constables that can come and arrest the person. Now we are looking at the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act of 2019, and here I'll just enlarge it for you. Is the definition of a transgender person? A transgender person, I will read it in full. So, a transgender person means a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to the person at birth and includes trans man or trans woman, whether or not such person has undergone sex reassignment surgery or hormone therapy or laser therapy or other such therapy. Persons with intersex variations, genderqueer, and persons having such socio-cultural identities as Kinner, Hijra, Aravani, or Jokta. Now, if you look at Canada in the same aspect, Canada has constituted something that is commonly known as the Human Rights Code, where offenses such as misgendering, that is, you call a person not by their preferred pronouns, uh, can be tried for in the Human Rights Code. Now, I believe that Western countries such as Canada have gone overbroad, even without specifically defining as to what a gender identity should entail.
Shashwat, I'll like to interrupt. Can I?
Definitely.
See, the Western notions, when I said about Western notions, we have to look into our society, firstly. Like, for example, you quoted about Canada. America has banned abortion. It is the legal right of every woman, and it is posing a lot of problems for the girls and the women of America. Teenage pregnancy was always a problem in America, and this law has compounded the problem. And what you're talking about as a very specific term in Indian context or in the context of the world, it's called hedonism. Have you read about Charvak's philosophy? Charvak says that
I do have a slight idea about it.
Charvak
You
says
may just
that it's materialistic society. It's materialistic idea. Jagat Satya Brahma Mithya. This is what they say. But even 2,500 years ago, Charvak's philosophy was suppressed for the greater good of the society. The Jains and the Buddhists have essentially incorporated, in a very mild form, materialism. But nobody dared, even then, nobody dared to legitimize hedonism as was given by Charvak. They said that he is too true, brutally, he is too true, and it is not good for the society. So I'm not against the personal rights of any person. By decriminalizing homosexuality, the personal rights have been preserved. But don't you think that marriage is a social act?
Yeah,
Whatever,
Mihir, you want to
Okay,
put
sir.
something?
if you
I,
go
I would
into,
I would just like to interrupt. Please, please, yes. Sir, please complete, please.
so if you go into the history of marriage, you'll find that it is the marriage was brought into human civilization to set certain things right. For example, inheritance. Inheritance was the most important thing. Like, for example, if I am related to three women in China, the invention of clock was made to ascertain who is impregnated first, so that whose son will be the heir to a person's wealth. Marriage is not only about sexual rights, it had a certain social uh, 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 conditions to fulfill and had some certain social goals. If you look at the modern West, they have totally shunned the whole idea of marriage. They're living together, and even Supreme Court um, has given sanctity to live-in relationships. But when you talk about marriage, you talk about procreation socially. So should we not not try to complicate things and keep it as simple as possible. Mihir, what's your idea on this?
Yes. So you have raised two very pertinent points here. So first of all, I would like to introduce the very concept that Supreme Court is really troubling with. So you talk about that marriage is a social, like it's a social institution. It concerns very much socially rather than legally. This brings us to the very preliminary question actually. Is marriage only something which has been enacted or which has been ensued for the social good or for the social well-being? And if it is just social, then only the parliament has all the rights to legislate upon it. If it is a social element. But if at all marriage becomes a right, an inherent right of every individual, then it is outside the domain of parliament. So this is the very first question that we must address actually. It is the most preliminary question. If we go beyond our jurisdiction, this is the first question to address. Is marriage a constitutionally inherent and essential right given to each and every individual? Or is it just a social institution which should be regulated by the parliament in the view of society, in the view of culture, and the view of tradition? If it is an inherent right, then be that as it may be whatever culture you have to give the right. But if it is just a social phenomena, then you can keep individuals barefoot of their right, and
No, but
parliament can legislate.
but the even the law, it has put restrictions on the institution of marriage. It's not a universal right. For example, the marriage of a minor with a minor or a major with a minor, it's a crime. So marriage itself is not a sacrosanct right. It has got its limitations.
If you agree on this, each and every fundamental right has its own reasonable restrictions.
Yes.
But the restrictions should be reasonable. So if we say that minor or any unsound person is not qualified to marry, it I don't think so that just because there are some reasonable restrictions on the very institute or the very idea of marriage, I don't think so. This argument that if there exists restriction, it is not a fundamental right. We cannot declare that, I guess. It is my personal limited opinion because there exists very much reasonable restriction on each and every right. No right is absolute in its like entirety.
So I'd like to add to what Sir and Mihir both said. Uh, I think this is a very pertinent problem. Both the cases. Let us first assume, for the sake of argument, that marriage is a matter of fundamental right. Now, in that aspect, uh, it is true that many of these rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and other rights, are subject to their own defined set of qualifications. In that aspect, we cannot, by definition, say that a state, by virtue of being a state, has the right to curb two particular individuals of the same sex to marry. This is an easy argument. When we go to the second aspect, that where we say that marriage cannot be termed as a fundamental right, or or it is just as is to be termed as a matter of social and legal acceptance. In that aspect, also we have to look into various kinds of things. So, for example, I'll tell you that few days ago, it was the central government who themselves concluded and who themselves agreed with the opinion of the Supreme Court that there are certain benefits that come with marriage, and that should also be provided to couples of the same sex, even if we are not giving them the right of marriage. Now, we have to understand that both the sides in this country, and if I may be brave enough to say so, the opinion that is being generated in this country is of the matter that the rights are already being given, and they have constituted an interministerial panel to deliberate upon what rights are to be given. So In that aspect, we are agreeing that the rights have to be given. But when we are talking about marriage as a whole, there are concerns such as how would the other laws be, uh, constituted in the same way. Sir, you talked about the aspect of adoption. I believe that a thing as important as the right to adopt has to be, gender neutral, or at least recalibrated in the real times. So we as Indians, I'm talking about both the court and the parliament. We cannot be timid enough to say that I am not giving you the right of same-sex marriage just because it will open a Pandora's box. Because all these laws have to be changed. That is my, humble opinion in this matter.
Well, I think we'll have to see how the future unfolds, because and I can sense that the new India and the youth of today, it's quite brave enough. Let's hope for the best. And I am um, full confidence in the wisdom of our Honorable Chief Justice. And he is a very unique person, a sort of a revolutionary. And I'm also looking forward to what judgment comes from Supreme Court. So, Gaurav,
Yes, sir. Nice to have this conversation because
Uh, but
what?
before
Yeah,
you
yeah,
conclude,
yeah.
can I just, I'll raise one last point with the permission of all the panelists involved.
yes, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is one very, pertinent, aspect that I think we have failed to address. Uh, so it's a new concept, privacy. So Puttaswamy judgment gives us a whole list of things that can be considered as a part of right to life under 21. And can we, even though we cannot, kind of juxtapose or read into the existing provisions and in the law of the land to include same-sex marriage, can we include this aspect of same-sex marriage as a right of privacy, and keeping other people out of my own personal business?
In what sense?
In the sense that the right of privacy entails that whatever you do, like I am paraphrasing here, that whatever you do in the boundaries of your own house or in the boundaries of your own social settings have to be determined by you, and
That
by
has
recognizing.
that has already been addressed by decriminalization of homosexuality. What more do you want?
I understand the implications of decriminalization here, but I believe that if you recognize a right, there also has to be a second order and a third order benefits of that right. So I believe just decriminalizing an act does not entail the full virtue of legalizing that act. So when we are decriminalizing the concept of homosexuality, all that we are saying that you can do it, it's not illegal. We are not changing any social opinions in that matter. But when we are giving them the right to marriage, when we are legally recognizing the second and the third order effects of marriage between same sex individuals, that will give effect to the aspect of right to privacy.
So
This is
you mean
my.
to you mean to say that if there is a society in which same-sex couple, they rent a house,
Right.
and if the neighbors, they if they talk anything about them, the same-sex couples have the right to sue those people who are talking against them. This is what you want to say. As in what is happened in Canada. Now that will be quite a problem, no?
So I will distinguish the case of Canada with the case of India.
Okay.
So what Canada says is that there was a case in Canada that said that when it was in a setting of a school and there was one child in that class that identified as a transgender women. Now, the teacher, by mistake or by malice, I do not know, called that person not by the pronouns that she preferred, but by the pronouns that she was born with. Now, in that aspect, uh, Canada law enabled that student to approach the human rights court. But when we talk about India, these are aspects when, like the example that you stated, like when we are renting an apartment, just by talking against someone, we cannot criminalize any action. I am free to discuss and criticize whoever it is that I want.
Does it not amount to mental harassment?
Well, that does, but I'm just talking about whatever it is that I can do on my own personal limits and the limits of the law. But when we are talking about discrimination, or when we are talking about discrimination by going to the point of violating their own right to privacy, this is where a problem arises. So when India actually recognizes this law as, giving them legal rights such as marriage, such as a joint bank account, as insurance, adoption, succession, inheritance, this is when the whole idea of a right to marriage fully and right to privacy in general fully actualizes itself. And that is the summary of my point.
Very true. Gaurav?
Yes, I think it's time to end this fantastic conversation because now we are talking about a thing which is not sensible enough to majority of our population because majority of our population don't care about these things like what is same sex marriage because after legalization of the sorry decriminalization of 377 many people also doesn't care about the act but think in their way. But now we are thinking about legalization of same-sex marriage, and as it is a part of a modern concept, it's also limiting orthodox belief. Like we can't have this conversation. Like we are not supposed to happy with this relationship or not. If it is legal, you have to accept because it is under the law and you have to accept it as well the law. So nice talking to on this topic same-sex marriage. I think after the judgment or wait for the judgment it will be. So let's so yeah, Mir, you want to say something?
Shashu, do you also raise hand? Do you have something to add?
No, Mihir, you go first. I'll just give you one concluding comment. That's it.
Yeah.
Even I wanted to just give one concluding comment. So, as Gaurav said, I'll take the cue from him that if it is the law, then law should be adhered to. So let
Yeah.
us talk about law. I'll conclude it with some complex questions of law. For that, I would also like to share the screen, if I may.
Hey, yeah, please.
So, this is an excerpt from the very judgment which decriminalized 377.
Okay.
Now, what we see here, the Supreme Court, in the very case of Navteej Singh Johar versus Union of India, they opine that there can be no doubt that an individual who has a right to a union under Article 21 of the Constitution. When we say union, we do not mean the union of marriage. It is a very excerpt which has been taken from Navteej Singh Johar only, in which the homosexuality was decriminalized to some extent. Now, my point being, in 2015, in Hodges judgment in SCOTUS, the US Supreme Court offered this very one right of same-sex marriage on the very premise that they have a right to marriage, and if you have a right to marry, and there exists an equal protection clause, then that right should extend every individual. Now let us talk about our constitution. I believe very firmly that we have been doing better than US when it comes to equality and any affirmative action in terms of Article 14. We also have equal protection clause. Perhaps I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but that is something that
Yeah.
is required actually. So if we have the equality clause here in India, which is better than, we are doing better than US, and sir may enlighten me after I'll conclude this, that in India, a right to marriage has also been recognized as a right, fundamental right under Article 21. It is a facet of Article 21 by Supreme Court. So what US Supreme Court did was, there was an existing right which was right to marry, and they extended it to sexual couples on the count that there exists an equal protection clause. Now, my point being is that in India we have a right to marry as observed by Supreme Court under very Article 21, which is the most essential right. We also have Article 14 included in the Golden Triangle. And why should we not extend that very right? If it is a matter of right, let us not talk about society right now. If it is a matter of right, and if right exists as a under Article 21 as a right to marry, observed by Supreme Court in plethora of judgments, then why should we not offer them the help of Article 14?
Well, rightly questioned, but I would like to wait for Supreme Court judgment first.
Yeah.
So
Because
I'll
this
just make
topic is in the yeah. Yeah, that's what.
so I'll just make a small concluding comment. So tomorrow, the hearing of this case resumes, and there are many things that we are looking forward to. It will be interesting to see the kind of arguments that are raised in the court. Uh, I, fundamentally believe that law as a subject should not divorce itself, from society. So, in that aspect, I hope that the honorable judges of the court and the learned councils there take into account the considerations of society as in large, and see, whether uh, you know see whether such rights have to be inculcated as a matter of societal need, or as a matter of or as a matter of legal need. So in that instance, I'm very happy that we have conducted this discussion today, and I was very looking forward to this discussion. I've told Gaurav multiple times in the
Yeah.
past few weeks. Have
Yeah.
it. It's going on in the court. So finally, that has come to fruition. And Mr. Biswajit and me, it was a great pleasure talking to both of you, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure was mine also, Shashwat.
Yes, and I would request Vishwajit sir to come again after this judgment, because we're supposed to have a good conversation and have a context of our conversation. Like, we have the judgment and we can put some comment out of the judgment, and let's see which thought will prevail and what ideology and what judgment will be. Okay, sir. Nice talking to you all.
It was a very nice conversation indeed.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah. So, and this conversation, nice having this, nice having your all time. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.